Moving to the countryside was supposed to be an escape. No more cramped city life, no more endless noise, and most importantly, no more HOA nightmares, or so I thought. The property was perfect. A beautiful stretch of land, a long driveway leading up to my new home, and the kind of peace and quiet I'd been craving for years. It was my land, fully paid for, and I was ready to enjoy the simple life. Then came Karen. I was unloading the last of my moving boxes when I heard the sound of tires crunching against gravel. I turned to see a woman marching toward me with the kind of energy that screamed, "I'm in charge." She was in her late 50s, short blonde bob, wearing a beige cardigan, and an expression that could curdle milk. "Excuse me," she called out, waving a clipboard in my direction. "Are you the new homeowner?" I sighed internally. I already knew where this was going. "Yep, that's me," I said, forcing a polite smile. She didn't introduce herself. Of course she didn't. She just launched straight into it. "This road here," she gestured to my driveway, "is part of the HOA maintained roads, and as such, you're subject to our rules and regulations." I blinked. "This is my driveway." She gave a tight-lipped smile, the kind that people give when they think they're talking to someone beneath them. "Technically, it's an access road that runs through HOA-controlled land." I frowned. I had gone through every document before purchasing this property, and nowhere had it said anything about the HOA having authority over my land. "I don't think that's correct," I said. "This driveway is on my deed. It's private property." Her smile didn't waver. "Well, that's not what our records show. And to ensure everything remains up to HOA standards, I'll need you to follow our regulations. No commercial vehicles, no unapproved landscaping, and of course," she looked me up and down, "no unauthorized guests using this road." I stared at her for a moment. Was she serious? "I'm sorry, but that's not happening," I said, crossing my arms. "This isn't HOA property. It's my land." Her smile finally faltered just a bit. "If you refuse to comply, I'm afraid we'll have to take further action." I raised an eyebrow. "Further action?" She squared her shoulders, holding the clipboard like it was some kind of legal weapon. "Fines, citations, even legal action if necessary. We take HOA violations very seriously in this community." I let out a short laugh. "You can't fine me for something that's not in your jurisdiction." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She clearly wasn't used to people challenging her authority. "I suggest you think this over," she said sharply, "because if you continue to ignore HOA regulations, things might get difficult for you." With that, she turned on her heel and stormed off, leaving me standing there shaking my head. I had moved out here to get away from HOA nonsense, and yet somehow I had walked straight into a new battle. But there was one difference this time. I wasn't going to back down. The next morning, I woke up feeling surprisingly good. Karen's ridiculous threats from the day before didn't bother me. I knew she had no legal standing over my land, and I figured she'd eventually back off once she realized I wasn't playing her game, but I underestimated just how far she was willing to go. As I grabbed my keys and stepped outside, I noticed something odd about my driveway. The gravel didn't look right. There were dark metal spikes scattered along the path, partially buried under the loose dirt and stones. My stomach dropped. I walked closer and crouched down. Spike strips, not just some scattered nails, actual police-style spike strips designed to shred tires instantly, and they were positioned perfectly, right in the middle of my only way in and out of my property. I clenched my jaw. This wasn't just an HOA power trip anymore. This was sabotage. Had I driven over them, my tires would have been completely destroyed. Hell, if I had been on my motorcycle instead of my truck, I could have crashed. My hands curled into fists. Karen did this. I pulled out my phone and snapped dozens of photos from every angle, making sure to capture just how deliberate this setup was. Then I switched to video and documented everything, zooming in on the spikes, pointing out the location, and narrating what I had found. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was going to make sure she paid for this. Time to call in the law. I dialed. My lawyer first. He was a no-nonsense guy who had dealt with HOA disputes before, and the moment I explained what happened, his tone turned ice cold. "This isn't an HOA issue anymore," he said. "This is criminal." That's exactly what I was thinking. Next call, the police. Within 30 minutes, 2 sheriff's deputies pulled up to my property. I met them at the driveway, phone in hand, ready to show them everything. One officer, a tall guy with sharp eyes, crouched down and inspected the spikes. "Yeah, these aren't just scattered nails. These were deliberately placed." I showed him the footage and the photos, explaining everything that had happened with Karen the day before. The second officer let out a low whistle. "You got a suspect in mind?" I didn't even hesitate. "Karen, HOA Karen. She's been harassing me since I moved in, claiming this road belongs to her HOA, even though it's on my deed." The officers exchanged looks. "Let's go talk to her." I won't lie, watching them march straight to Karen's house was one of the most satisfying things I had ever seen. Karen faces the consequences. When she opened the door and saw the deputies standing there, her entire face changed. At first, she tried to play innocent. "Oh, officers! Is there a problem?" They wasted no time. "We need to talk about the spike strips placed on Mr. My Name's driveway." Her expression flickered for just a second. Fear, guilt, something. But she quickly recovered. "I have no idea what you're talking about." The officer didn't budge. "We have photographic and video evidence. And if we check your property, are we going to find spike strips matching the ones on his driveway?" Karen's face drained of color. Then came the excuses. "Well, I was just trying to enforce HOA rules. He refused to follow our regulations, and then sometimes you have to take strong measures." One of the officers actually laughed. "Ma'am, let me be clear. HOA rules do not justify placing dangerous obstructions on someone's private property. This is destruction of property. And reckless endangerment." Karen started to panic. She turned red, her breathing quickened. "I didn't mean, I was just—" "No more talking," the officer cut her off. "You're going to remove those immediately." Karen stammered, but the other deputy wasn't having it. "And if we find out you pull something like this, again we'll be back with an arrest warrant." Her mouth snapped shut. The beginning of the end under police supervision. Karen was forced to remove the spike strips from my driveway. She had to do it herself, sweating and fuming, while I stood there, arms crossed, watching her dig them up like the criminal she was. As she yanked the last strip from the ground, she shot me the nastiest glare I'd ever seen. "You're going to regret this," she hissed. I just smiled. "We'll see," because at that moment I knew one thing for sure. Karen wasn't finished, and neither was I. You'd think that after getting caught red-handed and nearly arrested, Karen would back off. But no, Karen wasn't just your average HOA nightmare. She was committed to her insanity. And this time, she took things to a level so absurd, so blatantly illegal, that even I had to pause and ask myself, is this woman actually out of her mind? The discovery: Karen goes full villain. I woke up early the next morning, still half expecting more nonsense from her. But I never imagined what I was about to see. As I stepped outside, coffee in hand, I immediately noticed something off about my driveway. The spot where Karen had previously placed the spike strips looked different. I walked closer and stopped cold. Karen had gone back in the middle of the night and poured concrete over the spike strips. She had cemented them into the ground. I knelt down and ran my hand over the rough surface. The metal spikes were still sticking out, permanently embedded in my driveway like some medieval road trap. This wasn't just some HOA nonsense anymore. This was deliberate, calculated destruction of private property, and I was done playing nice. Calling in the big guns, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my phone and called my lawyer. "She what?" he asked, his voice flat with disbelief. She cemented spike strips into my driveway, I repeated, still staring at the damage. This is a whole new level of crazy. There was a pause. Then my lawyer laughed. Oh, she's done, he said. This isn't just reckless endangerment anymore. This is felony-level property destruction. He didn't waste time. He told me exactly what to do next. Call the cops, and that's exactly what I did. Karen faces the law. Again. When the police arrived, their reaction was priceless. The same. Officers from yesterday stood there, hands on their hips, staring at the cemented spike strips like they couldn't believe what they were seeing. One of them let out a low whistle. I've seen a lot of HOA drama, but this is next level. I showed them the photos and videos I had taken before Karen covered the strips in cement, proving it wasn't something that had always been there. That was all they needed. They marched straight to Karen's house and knocked loud enough to shake the door. When she opened it, the moment she saw the cops, her face went pale. What? What now? She asked, her voice already defensive. One officer crossed his arms. Ma'am, we need to talk about the spike strips you cemented into your neighbor's driveway. Karen blinked. Then she had the audacity to fake confusion. What? I don't know anything about that. The officer didn't even flinch. We have photographic evidence, timestamps, and records of previous warnings. Karen's face twitched. Then the tantrum began. This is harassment. I was just trying to protect the community. He's the problem here, not me. The HOA has rules and he refuses to follow them. The officer sighed. Ma'am, HOA rules don't override state property laws. You are not above the law. That's when he delivered the best part. You have two choices. You can remove those spike strips immediately, or we can press felony charges for property damage and endangerment. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. She looked around, and that's when she realized the entire neighborhood was watching. Karen's public humiliation. People had come out of their homes. Neighbors stood in their yards, peeking from porches, some even recording on their phones. Karen, the once untouchable HOA tyrant, was now the laughingstock of the entire neighborhood. She had no choice. So, in front of everyone, Karen was forced to grab a hammer and chisel and break apart her own illegal spike strip trap. She sweated. She grunted. She fumed. Every clang of metal on concrete was a public reminder that she had lost. It took nearly an hour, but eventually the driveway was cleared. She stood there panting, her face red with anger and embarrassment. I could have gloated. I could have laughed, but instead I just smirked and said, maybe next time read the law before trying to enforce fake HOA rules. She stormed back into her house without a word. And me, I enjoyed the sweetest cup of coffee I'd ever had. Because I knew Karen was defeated, but something told me she wasn't finished yet. If there's one thing I've learned about people like Karen, it's that they don't go down quietly. Most people, after being publicly humiliated and nearly arrested, would take the L and move on. But Karen, she doubled down, even after being forced to break apart her illegal spike strip trap in front of the entire neighborhood. She still thought she had power, and she was about to make one last desperate attempt to prove it. The emergency HOA meeting. 2 days later, every homeowner in the neighborhood got an urgent email from the HOA board. Subject: emergency meeting regarding HOA leadership and community issues. I rolled my eyes. Here we go. It didn't take a genius to figure out who was behind this. Karen had been humiliated, and now she was scrambling to regain control. The meeting was set for that evening in the community clubhouse. I wasn't planning on going at first, but curiosity got the best of me. I had to see this train wreck unfold in person. When I arrived, the room was packed. People were whispering, side-eyeing Karen, who sat at the front with her signature clipboard of doom. Her face was tight with anger, and she clutched the clipboard like it was her last shred of power. The moment the meeting started, she stood up and launched into a rant. Karen's final power grab. I have called this emergency meeting because our community is under attack. she declared, voice shaking with rage. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some people looked confused, others looked annoyed. Karen took a dramatic breath, then pointed directly at me. Our HOA has rules, and this man refuses to follow them. He has repeatedly disrespected our authority, endangered our community, and spread misinformation about me and this board. I crossed my arms, letting her dig her own grave. He has encouraged lawlessness, she continued, her voice rising. We need to take immediate action. I propose a vote to forcibly remove him from the community. Silence. Then laughter. Someone actually laughed out loud. Karen's face twisted. This isn't a joke, she snapped. But it was. Because everyone in that room had watched her spiral into madness over the past few weeks. They had seen her place, spike strips, try to manipulate the law, and embarrass herself in front of the cops. And now, she was standing there, demanding that I be kicked out of my own home, when in reality, she was the problem. Finally, one of the board members stood up, a middle-aged woman named Linda, who had been on the board for years. Karen, she sighed, rubbing her temples. This isn't about him. It's about you. Karen's eyes widened. Excuse me? Linda folded her arms. This board has received dozens of complaints about your behavior. The spike strips, the police reports, the way you abuse your position. A few people nodded. This community is tired, Karen, another board member spoke up. Tired of the drama, the petty rules, and the constant harassment. Karen's face went ghost white. What are you saying? She whispered. Linda took a deep breath and dropped the bombshell. We're voting you out of the HOA, Karen. The vote that ended. In all Karen's mouth fell open. No, you can't do that, she sputtered. I am the HOA. But one by one, board members raised their hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all of them. Unanimous. Karen had just been removed from power. Karen's final meltdown. For the first time since I had met her, Karen looked truly helpless. Then, she snapped, You traitors! She shrieked, her voice cracking. You're all against me. I did everything for this community. No one reacted. No one cared. She turned on me. This is your fault, she screamed, lunging forward. But before she could reach me, 2 people grabbed her arms. Karen, calm down, Linda hissed, but Karen didn't calm down. She started thrashing, her face turning red with rage, flailing and screaming like a child throwing a tantrum. Then, in an act of pure desperation, she actually swung at a neighbor. Gasps. Silence. Then, security stepped in. The final blow, 2 security guards grabbed Karen and started dragging her toward the door. No! No, you can't do this to me. I'm the HOA president. But nobody listened. Nobody cared. And as the doors slammed shut behind her, the room let out a collective sigh of relief. Karen was gone, and for the first time since moving here, I actually felt like I was home. Some people, when they lose power, accept it and move on. Karen, she went out kicking and screaming, literally. After her public meltdown at the HOA meeting, I thought maybe, just maybe, that was the last I'd hear from her. She had lost her position, her influence, and every shred of credibility she once had. But Karen wasn't just an HOA nightmare. She was a full-blown criminal in the making. The night of the theft that night, I was finally enjoying some peace and quiet. No drama, no HOA nonsense, just me, a cold drink, and a sense of victory. Then, at 2:37 a.m., my phone buzzed with a security alert. I groggily reached for it and checked the camera feed, and my jaw dropped. A tow truck was parked in my driveway, and, hooked up to the back, my truck. For a split second, I thought, did I miss a payment? But no, that wasn't possible. I owned my truck outright. That's when I saw her. Standing beside the tow truck, arms crossed like a queen reclaiming her throne, was Karen. Karen's last. I stared at the screen, trying to wrap my head around what the hell I was watching. Karen. had actually hired a tow truck to steal my vehicle. She was taking revenge. I grabbed my phone and immediately called the police. "This is an emergency," I told the dispatcher. "A woman is having my car illegally towed right now. I've got it on camera." The dispatcher didn't even hesitate. "Officers are on their way." I threw on some clothes, grabbed my spare car keys, and jumped into my backup vehicle, a smaller SUV. Then I followed the tow truck. The police intercept. By the time I caught up, the tow truck was pulling into a private impound lot. I parked across the street and watched as the driver backed my truck into a parking space. Then, flashing lights. 2 police. Cars pulled up, blocking the tow truck's exit. I smiled. Karen, who had been standing there supervising the whole thing, immediately panicked. The cops stepped out, and one of them pointed at my truck. "Whose vehicle is that?" The tow driver, clearly realizing something was wrong, hesitated. We were called for a tow." The officer turned to me. "Is this your vehicle, sir?" I held up my registration. "Yep, and I never authorized this tow. In fact, I have security footage showing her," I pointed directly at Karen, "ordering it to be taken." The cop turned to Karen. "Ma'am, is this true?" Karen's face flushed red. His vehicle was illegally parked. The HOA..." The officer cut her off. "Ma'am, you were removed from the HOA. And even if you weren't, the HOA has no authority to tow private vehicles from private property." And Karen sputtered. "But you just committed grand theft auto, ma'am." Boom. Checkmate. Karen's eyes went wide. "No! This is a misunderstanding. I was just trying to enforce the rules." But it was too late. The police ordered the lot manager to release my truck immediately, free of charge. Then they turned to Karen. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for grand theft auto and destruction of property." And right there in front of everyone, Karen was cuffed and shoved into the back of a police car. Karen loses everything by the next morning. The entire community knew. Neighbors stood on their porches, watching as the police escorted Karen out of her house, this time not as an HOA tyrant but as a criminal, her once loyal allies in the HOA. They abandoned her instantly. The HOA issued an official statement denying any involvement with Karen's actions, completely disowning her. She was stripped of her HOA membership, fined thousands of dollars in damages, and, best of all, evicted from the neighborhood. Karen, the woman who spent years lording over the community, now had nowhere to go. And as she was escorted away, one of the neighbors muttered under their breath, "Should have just left the man's driveway alone. The end, or just the beginning." With Karen gone, the neighborhood finally felt like home again. No more insane rules, no more HOA drama, just peace. And as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I took a sip of my drink and smiled, because in the end, justice always wins. Life lessons from the HOA tyrant's downfall. The power of integrity and patience. This story isn't just about an out-of-control HOA president. It's about the consequences of unchecked power and the strength of patience and persistence. Karen's downfall serves as a powerful reminder that authority without accountability always leads to disaster. People who abuse their power, whether in a small community or in greater society, often believe they are untouchable. But as we saw, arrogance and entitlement always catch up with them. Eventually, they push too far, and their own actions lead to their undoing. For those who have ever felt wronged by unfair leadership or bureaucracy, this story highlights the importance of knowing your rights and standing your ground. The homeowner didn't react with reckless anger. He gathered evidence, followed the law, and let the system work in his favor. In life, it's easy to let emotions take over when faced with injustice. But true wisdom comes from fighting smart, not just fighting hard. Another key lesson is the power of community. At first, Karen ruled through intimidation, but in the end, her neighbors turned against her. Why? Because people will only tolerate tyranny for so long. When the truth comes to light, those who misuse power often find themselves alone. Finally, this story is a testament to the idea that justice takes time. In life, we may not always see immediate consequences for wrongdoing, but patience, integrity, and perseverance will always lead to the right outcome. The key is to stay calm, trust the process, and never let a bully win.